Chapter 2 of Barnaby Rudge, A Tale of the Riots of '80. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recorded by Mill Nicholson. Barnaby Rudge, A Tale of the Riots of '80 by Charles Dickens. Chapter 2.
"A strange story,"
said the man who had been the cause of the narration.
"Stranger still if it comes about as you predict. Is that all?"
A question so unexpected nettled Solomon Daisy not a little. By dint of relating the story very often, and ornamenting it, according to village report, with a few flourishes suggested by the various hearers from time to time, he had come by degrees to tell it with great effect, and is that all, after the climax, was not what he was accustomed to.
"Is that all?" he repeated. "Yes, that's all, sir, and enough too, I think." "I think so too. My horse, young man. He is but a hack hired from a roadside posting house, but he must carry me to London to-night."
"To-night?" said Joe.
"To-night," returned the other. "What do you stare at? This tavern would seem to be a house of call for all the gaping idlers of the neighbourhood."
At this remark, which evidently had reference to the scrutiny he had undergone, as mentioned in the foregoing chapter, the eyes of John Willet and his friends were diverted with marvellous rapidity to the copper boiler again. Not so with Joe, who, being a mettlesome fellow, returned the stranger's angry glance with a steady look, and rejoined, "It is not a very bold thing to wonder at your going on to-night. Surely you have been asked such a harmless question in an inn before, and in better weather than this. I thought you mightn't know the way, as you seem strange to this part."
"The way?"
repeated the other irritably. "Yes. Do you know it?"
"I'll find it," replied the man, waving his hand and turning on his heel. "Landlord, take the reckoning here."
John Willet did as he was desired, for on that point he was seldom slow, except in the particulars of giving change, and testing the goodness of any piece of coin that was proffered to him, by the application of his teeth, or his tongue, or some other test, or in doubtful cases by a long series of tests terminating in its rejection. The guest then wrapped his garments about him so as to shelter himself as effectually as he could from the rough weather, and without any word or sign of farewell betook himself to the stable yard. Here Joe, who had left the room on the conclusion of their short dialogue, was protecting himself and the horse from the rain under the shelter of an old penthouse roof. "He's pretty much of my opinion," said Joe, patting the horse upon the neck. "I'll wager that your stopping here to-night would please him better than it would please me."
"He and I are of different opinions, as we have been more than once on our way here," was the short reply.
"So I was thinking before you came out, for he has felt your spurs, poor beast." The stranger adjusted his coat collar about his face, and made no answer.
"You'll know me again, I see,"
he said, marking the young fellow's earnest gaze when he had sprung into the saddle. "The man's worth knowing, master, who travels a road he don't know, mounted on a jaded horse, and leaves good quarters to do it on such a night as this."
"You have sharp eyes and a sharp tongue, I find."
"Both, I hope, by nature, but the last grows rusty sometimes for want of using."
"Use the first less too, and keep their sharpness for your sweethearts, boy,"
said the man. So saying, he shook his hand from the bridle, struck him roughly on the head with the butt end of his whip, and galloped away, dashing through the mud and darkness with a headlong speed, which few badly mounted horsemen would have cared to venture, even had they been thoroughly acquainted with the country, and which, to one who knew nothing of the way he rode, was attended at every step with great hazard and danger. The roads, even within 12 miles of London, were at that time ill paved, seldom repaired, and very badly made. The way this rider traversed had been ploughed up by the wheels of heavy waggons, and rendered rotten by the frosts and thaws of the preceding winter, or possibly of many winters. Great holes and gaps had been worn into the soil, which, being now filled with water from the late rains, were not easily distinguishable even by day, and a plunge into any one of them might have brought down a surer-footed horse than the poor beast now urged forward to the utmost extent of his powers. Sharp flints and stones rolled from under his hoofs continually. The rider could scarcely see beyond the animal's head, or farther on either side than his own arm would have extended. At that time, too, all the roads in the neighbourhood of the metropolis were infested by footpads or highwaymen, and it was a night of all others in which any evil-disposed person of this class might have pursued his unlawful calling with little fear of detection. Still the traveller dashed forward at the same reckless pace, regardless alike of the dirt and wet which flew about his head, the profound darkness of the night, and the probability of encountering some desperate characters abroad. At every turn and angle, even where a deviation from the direct course might have been least expected, and could not possibly be seen until he was close upon it, he guided the bridle with an unerring hand, and kept the middle of the road. Thus he sped onward, raising himself in the stirrups, leaning his body forward until it almost touched the horse's neck, and flourishing his heavy whip above his head with the fervour of a madman. There are times when, the elements being in unusual commotion, those who are bent on daring enterprises, or agitated by great thoughts, whether of good or evil, feel a mysterious sympathy with the tumult of nature, and are roused into corresponding violence. In the midst of thunder, lightning, and storm, many tremendous deeds have been committed. Men, self-possessed before, have given a sudden loose to passions they could no longer control. The demons of wrath and despair have striven to emulate those who ride the whirlwind and direct the storm, and man, lashed into madness with the roaring winds and boiling waters, has become for the time as wild and merciless as the elements themselves. Whether the traveller was possessed by thoughts which the fury of the night had heated and stimulated into a quicker current, or was merely impelled by some strong motive to reach his journey's end, on he swept, more like a hunted phantom than a man, nor checked his pace until, arriving at some cross-roads, one of which led by a longer route to the place whence he had lately started, he bore down so suddenly upon a vehicle which was coming towards him, that in the effort to avoid it he well nigh pulled his horse upon his haunches, and narrowly escaped being thrown.
"Yo-ho!" cried the voice of a man. "What's that? Who goes there?"
"A friend,"
replied the traveller.
"A friend?" repeated the voice. "Who calls himself a friend and rides like that, abusing heaven's gifts in the shape of horseflesh, and endangering not only his own neck, which might be no great matter, but the necks of other people?"
"You have a lantern there, I see," said the traveller, dismounting. "Lend it me for a moment. You have wounded my horse, I think, with your shaft or wheel."
"Wounded him!" cried the other. "If I haven't killed him, it's no fault of yours. What do you mean by galloping along the king's highway like that, eh?"
"Give me the light," returned the traveller, snatching it from his hand, "and don't ask idle questions of a man who is in no mood for talking."
"If you had said you were in no mood for talking before, I should perhaps have been in no mood for lighting," said the voice. "Howsoever, as it's the poor horse that's damaged, and not you, one of you is welcome to the light at all events, but it's not the crusty one."
The traveller returned no answer to this speech, but holding the light near to his panting and reeking beast, examined him in limb and carcass. Meanwhile the other man sat very composedly in his vehicle, which was a kind of chaise with a depository for a large bag of tools, and watched his proceedings with a careful eye. The looker-on was a round, red-faced, sturdy yeoman, with a double chin, and a voice husky with good living, good sleeping, good humour, and good health. He was past the prime of life, but Father Time is not always a hard parent, and though he tarries for none of his children, often lays his hand lightly